For more, let's speak now with Dr. Stephen Zunes. He's a professor of politics at the University of San Francisco. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. So tell us just how concerning would these massive protests be for Netanyahu, and could this be the turning point that prompts a bit of change in his approach to handling the conflict?
He hasn't listened to the protesters so far, but this is the largest demonstration of its kind, and combined with the general strike starting tomorrow, which will shut down much of the country, it will definitely put unprecedented pressure. The problem, though, is that the other way of bringing pressure, that is from the United States, has not been forthcoming. That President Biden still takes the position that Hamas is the main obstacle, but most Israelis recognize that Hamas has offered to free the hostages. In fact, they've offered to free the hostages for a number of months now in return for a ceasefire and Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territory. But Netanyahu is so far remaining firm that he wants to keep troops in and that the war will continue.
Professor Zunes, you were just saying this moments ago, not the first time Bibi has faced massive protests. This started really when he tried to, when he took on the judiciary. Now, of course, we have the war. Talk to us a bit, talk to us though about the size. Talk to us about the scale of the anger and of the grief here. Do you get a sense that it is going to be different this time? I mean, we know, for example, the country's largest union taking part, the mayor of Tel Aviv, among those backing this nationwide strike that's set to take place today as well?
It's hard to say. I mean, he is in power as a result of a very narrow coalition. And so far, he has tried to appease the far-right elements that don't want to compromise at all. At the same time, there are some more mainstream conservative voices within the coalition, which may be concerned about the economic damage and other implications of protests of this nature.
Professor, so what do you think the Hamas's strategic calculations behind the killing of the hostages is? I mean, how would this decision affect their negotiation leverage? I mean, could it alter the dynamics of the negotiation process here?
Well, this is a brutal, if the Israeli government reports are correct, this was indeed a brutal execution. So far, the bodies of hostages have come forward. It was less conclusive what killed them, and in some cases appeared it was actually the Israelis through their airstrikes or other means. But this does appear that there are at least some elements within Hamas or Islamic Jihad, whoever was in charge of this particular group, that are indeed willing to take such horrific actions. On top of course, the terrible crime of kidnapping them in the first place. But for the hardliners, it will say, "Oh, these people are ruthless, so you can't deal with them." But for those who are pushing the government for compromise, they can say, "Hey, look, if we don't do something soon, even more Israelis will die, and more hostages will die, and we need to go ahead and have a ceasefire and withdrawal."
Professor Zunes, I wanted to ask you about the Israeli position. We know that the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, was the lone cabinet vote against maintaining control of the Philadelphia corridor, and he, basically said, look, Israel can regain control, of that border within hours. Basically said within 8 hours, once the hostages or some of the hostages are freed. I'm not familiar with the details of what international ceasefires are like, but can you explain what's stopping Israel from going forward and agreeing to the full 3-phase plan put forward by President Biden, and then going back into Gaza again, maybe 3 months later, 6 months later, a year to finish the job? I mean, what's stopping them from doing that?
Yeah, it appears primarily to be politics. Indeed, the strategic leaders in Israel, both in the intelligence community and in the and the defense ministry and the like, recognize that Netanyahu's strategy really is not getting them very far. It is just getting more people killed. It's the civilian death toll, of course, is horrific in the tens of thousands. and the destruction of the majority of structures in the territory, and of course the risk to the hostages themselves recently. So these military people, they're plenty hawkish. I mean, they're certainly willing to utilize military force, but they're just recognizing that Netanyahu is just holding on because he realizes the longer the war goes, the longer he'll be in power. He'd certainly lose any election that would immediately follow a ceasefire. And then he could head to jail because he's under multiple indictments for various corruption. So it's appearing more and more that Netanyahu is playing with the lives of both Palestinians and Israelis in his desperate effort to remain in power and stay out of prison.
And Professor, President Biden and Kamala Harris both put out a statement following the discovery of the bodies. Biden saying Hamas leaders will pay for these crimes. What did you make of the way they have responded to this?
Well, this is particularly poignant in that one of the hostages was an American citizen whose family had actually spoken at the recently concluded Democratic National Convention. So millions of Americans know this family's grief, and of course, like any leaders of any country, they're concerned about the fate of their citizens. At the same time, the fact that they have reiterated the very appropriate condemnation of Hamas, while at the same time refusing to join the large numbers of Israelis who are pushing Netanyahu to make the necessary compromises that would free the remaining hostages, is indicative of pretty much the way U.S. policy has been from the beginning, and that is to basically support the Israeli government with perhaps a few mild statements of rebuke, but by and large, not really be willing to put the pressure on the government that quite a few Israelis now are saying that Washington should.
All right, Professor Zunes, we have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for your thoughts and for your insights. Dr. Stephen Zunes is Professor of Politics at the University of San Francisco.